Hey everybody, this is Ask the Pastor. This is where anyone in the world can send in questions, and I've got to do my best to answer them. I've got a question from my friend from Texas, Connor Hoyle. It's a long question. I'm going to put it up on the screen and read it kind of fast, but I encourage you to stick through. Here's the bottom line down there. Here's the long version. I've got an Ask the Pastor question for you. So as you know, I took up living history as a hobby a few years ago. One of the strangest things about being a living historian, and I cannot emphasize enough how the qualifiers of casual and amateur, is the sort of clash of understandings and images that people have. One would expect that people on the outside are not knowledgeable, and of course, it's hard even to know where to start because there are such pervasive misconceptions. But even stranger than that are those on the inside who cling to those misconceptions because they inform a larger mythology. Vikings are sexy, right? They're the most badass warriors. Let's be Vikings and go to Brawlhalla. This is all leading into my question. We've discussed some of the technical aspects. They mostly used spears and not as many swords, for instance. But knowing that is merely historical trivia. Thinking they were berserking, brutal warriors, however, is not only problematic, it actually misinforms your entire understanding of history and humanity even. This is what I mean by pervasive, not merely ubiquitous, but actually misinforming one's entire understanding. So here's the question. What are, in your experience, the most pervasive myths regarding the Bible? What are the common attractive myths that will misinform an individual's entire understanding of the Bible? Great question, Connor. And there's a lot to go into. I can link a video up there. There's one of the first Ask the Question questions I ever had was about misconceptions people have about Christianity. Yours gives it more color. Of course, it's Christmas time now. We're getting ready for Advent, and so I'm thinking about all the Christmas story myths that are so pervasive. Almost everything that's a part of like our traditional Christian Christmas story, where Mary's riding on the donkey's side saddle. There's nothing about that. And then there's no room for them at the inn. The innkeepers all in town turn them away. There's nothing in the Bible about that. There's one word that says, sometimes is translated inn, but it also can mean guest room. And there's no room for them can mean it's no place for them, right? So like maybe the guest room was upstairs, as guest rooms often were. And then the stable with the animals, that's not in there. All it says is a manger, which is a basin, something you might use to feed animals. But people had animals in their houses then. And so much of the story of Christmas. Oh, and not to mention, don't even get me started on the idea that Mary was a 14-year-old girl or some kind of young girl. Actually, do get me started on that. Somebody ask me a question. Ask me why Mary was not 14, because I want to do an Ask the Pastor on that, because that's such a ridiculous, pervasive, problematic story that we keep telling on no biblical basis. But if you want to talk about the most pervasive myths that are actively misinforming us about the Bible, which are rooted in history, the place I've got to go, and it's, by the way, not unrelated to what we're willing to imagine a first century Jewish town would do about a pregnant woman, is our just utter and complete and systematic misunderstanding of virtually everything about Judaism. As Christians, we are taught and made to memorize and given this narrative of what Judaism is that's just completely wrong, right? We're told that Judaism is spelled D-O, and all religions are, and Christianity is spelled D-O-N-E.
See, because religion says do, Jesus says done.
And we're told that Judaism is about trying to make yourself righteous before God by following all sorts of rules and laws, and that's the basis of this like very legalistic system.
See, one's the work of God, but one's a man-made invention. See, one is the cure, but the other's the infection.
And it isn't true. It doesn't represent what Judaism is now, what our brothers and sisters who are Jewish are actually engaging in, and it doesn't represent what Judaism was for the people of God who were the inheritors of the promise of faith, who were the chosen people, and who Jesus was a part of. Jesus was Jewish. Jesus was Jewish. He never stopped being Jewish. He is, and we just have distanced ourselves so much from this reality. True Judaism is spelled B-E. Judaism is about what you are. It's something that if you're born into this community, if you're born into this culture, then you're Jewish. And being Jewish, doing the things, following the traditions, is something you do not out of an obligation or a desire to curry God's favor or keep the gods from being angry, as some of the ancient polytheistic religions were, but rather as an outpouring of your identity. It is very, very consistent with a lot of the things that we try and struggle in vain to teach to Christian communities. And part of the reason we struggle in vain to teach that concept is because we're taught that Judaism is this other thing, that it just isn't. Part of the way we've come to be confused is because we as Christians spend a lot of time in the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, where Jesus spends a lot of time with the Pharisees. And so we've, in some ways, extended the things Jesus says about the Pharisees. If you're a pastor and you don't do a lot of historical research and you don't know a lot of Jewish people personally, you're likely to assume that Jews are like the Pharisees in the gospel and just be like, well, that's just the way they were back then, which isn't quite true. The Pharisees in the Gospels are the angriest, nastiest Pharisees, right? There are good Pharisees and Sadducees in the Gospels. You get people like Joseph of Arimathea, who was on the Sanhedrin and yet buried Jesus. You've got people who come and follow Jesus from among the Pharisees. But you do also get some people who are trying to trap him. And Pharisees were a particular community of Jewish people who lived in a time during Roman occupation, and they were analogous in many ways to our fundamentalist evangelicals. They were people who wanted to believe their scriptures very literally, who wanted to believe in the resurrection. Particularly, we're talking about the eschatological resurrection, the resurrection on the last day. And they were a people who believed the best response to Roman occupation was a greater modicum of holiness, to be extra holy as a way to respond to our oppression, as a way to encourage God to save, and as a way to just be saved, to live rightly in this place. What do we do when we have such limited freedom? We be holier. That's actually a really interesting, laudable perspective. And there's a reason Jesus spent so much time with the Pharisees, because he kind of agreed with them more than the other people, right? Because the Sadducees were like, what do we do when we're under occupation? We compromise. We get in bed with the Romans and we give up on our sacred beliefs. And the Zealots are like, what do? We kill people. We become terrorists. And the Qumran community, the Essenes, it almost slipped my head. The Essenes are like, what do? We run away. We start, we go into the desert and don't engage with people. And so the Pharisees were the closest. The Pharisees were like, no, let's argue about the text and how it's interpreted and what is true and what is best and how we live in the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus is like, yeah, you people. And they're like, yeah, because what we're going to do is we're going to be really specific, and we're not just going to tithe our fruits and vegetables, but also our herbs. And Jesus is like, no, because he's engaging with this this idea. So that's part of where our misunderstanding of Judaism comes from, and our failure to realize that these are the people of God who have great ideas about God, actually, that we, again, that form the foundation of our understanding of relationship with God. The foundation of monotheism, of Abrahamic faith, comes out of this wonderful community, which then evolved. Rabbinic Judaism is a different animal from ancient Judaism. A lot of aspects about what it is to be Jewish now are different, but still really interesting in a lot of ways. And that leads us to kind of the second way that our misunderstandings of Judaism are formed and made pervasive and reinforced, and that is Germany. Because after Martin Luther, in 1500, the center of theology in the Christian world, particularly the Protestant world, centered around Germany. And we had it was just the place to go. Like all the best universities, all the best places to go get your PhD in theology and become a theologian and write about what it is to be a Christian. They were in Europe and centered around Germany. It had the most prestige. It was the best place. And so in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, even into the 1940s, anybody who was anybody at least had spent a significant part of their formative life in Germany around proto-Nazis and in Europe around a culture of white people who were deeply, deeply anti-Semitic, who just hated Jewish people because they had an idea of who Jewish people were to them, and then they were reading their texts, and then they were applying their prejudices about the Jewish people that were living near them to the text and choosing to interpret things that are utterly, utterly unbiblical out of racism, out of prejudice, out of anti-Semitism, and real hatred and wrath against Judaism. And that's also something we're inheritors of. As modern-day Protestants, we learned from the people who learned from the people who learned from Nazis. We just did. And we have to learn how to untangle those myths. We just have to learn how to pay attention to what everybody's always taught me, what things that are a part of our tradition, a part of our yarns of how all the normal pastors and Bible teachers interpret things is actually developed from some people who were interpreting the Bible with a lens that is the exact opposite of helpful, absolutely detrimental. Because the truth of what the Bible says about Judaism, the majority of the Bible is the Hebrew scriptures, is written by Jewish people, for the sake of edifying the people of God. And we ought to be extremely thankful that through Jesus we have not washed all that away, not abolished the law and the prophets, but fulfilled them and allowed the promises and the truth of the law and the prophets to extend to every tribe and every nation, which was not a change to Judaism, not a deviation, but what Judaism was always for, that the people would be blessed to be a blessing, tikkun olam. And so if we start reading the Bible without that anti-Semitic misunderstanding, I think we'll see a lot of new things open up in terms of our understanding. I hope that answers your question. There are more misconceptions, but I think that's a really big one that matches your experience as a living historian. If you liked it, I hope you'll share it. If you didn't like it, I hope we can talk more about it and kind of where I see our misinformed ideas about Judaism. And if you've got your own question, I hope you'll send it in. Here are some other questions I've answered, including this one. That's the first one that I mentioned. of misconceptions. Thank you, and I'll see you next time on Ask the Pastor.